Welcome to Sleep Easy, where we invite you to unwind and let go of the day's busyness. I'm grateful you've chosen to spend this quiet moment with us. Tonight's story is called The Enchanted Quest, a tale of brothers and magic. In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills, two brothers, Ethan, ambitious and brash, and Caleb, gentle and thoughtful, live with their father, a humble leatherworker. When a mysterious traveler shares tales of a hidden enchanted castle and a princess cursed to sleep, the brothers embark on a perilous journey to break the spell and claim the riches promised to those who succeed. Along the way, they face trials that test their patience, kindness, and courage, and discover that true strength comes from the heart. This is a story of brotherhood, adventure, and the magic that lies within each of us. Now, as you settle into your bed, take a slow, deep breath. Let the weight of your body relax into the surface beneath you. With each breath, feel your muscles soften and your mind quiet, ready to drift into a peaceful, restful sleep. In a small village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there stood a modest cottage where two brothers, Ethan and Caleb, lived with their father. Their home was simple, with a thatched roof and walls made of timber, but it was filled with warmth and love. The brothers had grown up here, alongside their father, who was a skilled leatherworker. The scent of tanned hides and polished leather was a constant presence in their home, and the rhythmic sound of tools at work was the soundtrack of their lives. Ethan, the elder of the two, had always been different. He was full of ambition, his heart set on something beyond the humble village life. His dreams were big, of traveling the world, of riches and glory, of a life that was free from the confines of their small home. He would often talk about the grand adventures he would have, the treasures he would find, and the heroes he would become. He had a fire in his eyes that burned brighter than any star in the sky, and his confidence was matched only by his impatience. Caleb, on the other hand, was quieter, more thoughtful. He loved his family dearly and found contentment in the simple life they led. His days were spent helping his father in the workshop, carefully stitching leather and shaping it into beautiful, useful items. He found joy in the little things, a freshly baked loaf of bread, the sound of birds singing in the trees, the comfort of being close to the ones he loved. He didn't share his brother's hunger for adventure, but deep down, he wondered if there was more to life than what he had known. Their father, a man of few words, loved his sons deeply. He had raised them on his own after their mother passed away when they were both young, and though their lives were far from easy, he had always done his best to provide for them. The leatherworking trade was his life's work, passed down from his own father, but it was a humble craft, and the village was small. It wasn't the kind of work that could make a fortune. Despite this, their father always made sure there was food on the table and a roof over their heads. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, an unexpected visitor arrived at their doorstep. He was a traveler, dressed in a cloak of rich, deep green that shimmered in the fading light. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and full of secrets. He carried with him an air of mystery, as though he had wandered far from home and seen things beyond imagination. "I've heard much of this village," the traveler said, his voice deep and warm. "And I've come to see the leatherworker's sons for myself." The brothers looked at each other with curiosity. Their father, never one to entertain guests, wiped his hands on a rag and motioned for the traveler to come inside. The traveler sat with them by the fire, sharing tales of distant lands and magical realms. He spoke of kingdoms with towering castles, of forests where trees whispered ancient secrets, and of rivers that glittered with gold. But the story that caught Ethan's attention the most was one of a hidden enchanted castle, deep within the heart of an untamed forest. According to the traveler, this castle was home to a powerful enchantment that kept its court asleep for centuries, and at its heart lay a princess, cursed to remain asleep until the right person broke the spell. The traveler's words were like a spark to Ethan's heart. He listened intently, his mind racing with thoughts of adventure, of treasure, of a life beyond the village. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to make his dreams come true. The promise of riches and glory filled his imagination, and he could hardly contain his excitement. "The castle," the traveler said, "can only be reached by those brave enough to face the dangers of the forest. And only one with a pure heart can break the enchantment and awaken the princess." Ethan's eyes gleamed with determination. "I will do it," he said, his voice firm and full of resolve. "I will find this enchanted castle, and I will awaken the princess." Caleb, sitting quietly beside his brother, felt a mix of hesitation and concern. He loved his brother dearly, but he wasn't sure if this journey was something they should embark on. The forest was known to be dangerous, and the idea of traveling so far from home, into the unknown, made him uneasy. But he couldn't bear the thought of Ethan facing such a perilous journey alone. "Ethan," Caleb began, his voice soft, "are you sure about this?" Ethan turned to him, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Of course I'm sure, Caleb. This is our chance to change our lives. Think of what we could have, a life of luxury, a grand castle, a kingdom to rule." Caleb looked at the fire, his mind whirling. He wasn't so sure about the idea of a life of luxury, but he knew his brother's heart was set on this quest. And though it filled him with worry, he couldn't bear to see him go alone. With a deep sigh, Caleb nodded. "I'll go with you," he said quietly. "But we must be careful. We don't know what dangers lie ahead." Their father, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. His voice was filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "You are both brave, but remember, the world is not as kind as it seems. The path you choose may be full of trials, and not all of them can be faced with strength alone. You must rely on more than just your courage." Ethan and Caleb exchanged a look, and despite the fear that lingered in Caleb's heart, they both knew that their journey was about to begin. The traveler rose to his feet and offered them a small map, marking the path to the enchanted castle. "You must leave at dawn," he said, for the journey is long, and the forest waits for no one." With that, the brothers prepared for their departure, their hearts heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. They said their goodbyes to their father, who hugged them tightly, his face a mixture of love and worry. And so, at the break of dawn, Ethan and Caleb set off on their adventure, unaware of the challenges and dangers that awaited them in the deep, enchanted woods. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Ethan and Caleb set off on their journey. Their father, standing at the doorway of their cottage, watched them with a heavy heart. Though his hands were steady and his voice had been calm, he couldn't help the knot of worry that tightened in his chest. This journey, he knew, would change his sons forever. The road ahead was quiet, the village still asleep as they walked along the familiar path that led into the forest. The leaves rustled softly in the morning breeze, and the air smelled of fresh earth and dew-soaked grass. Ethan, full of excitement and energy, took the lead, his steps quick and light, while Caleb walked more slowly, his thoughts heavy. Though Caleb had agreed to accompany his brother, his heart was not as eager. He could not shake the feeling that the mysterious traveler's words were more than just stories. There was something about him, his intense gaze, his knowing smile, that made Caleb uneasy. He couldn't explain it, but he felt as though the traveler had known something about their journey that they did not. And, as they walked further into the forest, Caleb began to wonder if the traveler's presence was no coincidence. Ethan, on the other hand, was already caught up in the thrill of the adventure. He couldn't stop talking about the enchanted castle, about the riches that awaited them, and about the princess they would awaken. His words were filled with excitement, his gestures wide as he painted grand images in the air. He spoke as though the journey were already half over, as though the castle and the princess were waiting for them just beyond the horizon. "We'll find it, Caleb," Ethan said, his voice full of confidence. "I know we will. This is our destiny." Caleb nodded, but his gaze often drifted to the forest around them, his senses alert. He had always been one to observe the world quietly, to notice the small things that others missed. And today, the forest seemed different. It felt alive, almost as though it were watching them. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches twisting and turning as if whispering secrets to one another. The path they walked on seemed to change, twisting and turning in ways that made Caleb doubt they were on the right track. But every time he looked to Ethan, his brother's unwavering confidence reassured him. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm golden light through the canopy above. The forest, while dense, was beautiful, lush green leaves, wildflowers and bursts of color, and the soft trickle of streams weaving through the underbrush. But it was also a place of mystery, with shadows that seemed to move and sounds that echoed strangely. It was a place where the unknown felt just around every corner. By midday, the brothers stopped to rest near a small clearing. Caleb took a seat on a rock, his gaze still lingering on the path they had come from, as though expecting something or someone else to appear. Ethan, however, stretched out on the grass, content to close his eyes and dream of what lay ahead. It was then that they heard a rustling in the bushes. Startled, Caleb stood up, his hand instinctively going to the small pouch of provisions he carried. Ethan, however, seemed unbothered, as if he had already grown used to the sounds of the forest. He looked up, ready to call out, but paused when he saw a figure emerging from the trees. It was the mysterious traveler. He appeared as though he had simply materialized from the shadows of the forest, stepping silently into the clearing as though he had been walking there all along. His cloak, now even darker than it had been the night before, flowed around him like a shadow, and his eyes gleamed with that same knowing intensity. He held a staff in his hand, its top adorned with a glowing crystal that pulsed with a faint light. "You've come far," the traveler said, his voice like the wind, smooth and steady. "But you've only just begun." Ethan jumped to his feet, his face breaking into a grin. How did you? We didn't expect to see you again." The traveler's smile was enigmatic, and he stepped closer to them, his gaze shifting between the two brothers. "Fate is an interesting thing," he said, "and sometimes it brings us to the places we need to be." Caleb, still uncertain, took a cautious step back. "Why are you here?" he asked. "We thought we were alone on this journey." The traveler's eyes twinkled as he regarded Caleb, as though seeing into the depths of his soul. "You are never truly alone, young one," he said softly. "Not when the path you walk is guided by something greater than yourself. The forest, the castle, the enchantment, it all has a purpose. And you, Caleb, are a part of that purpose." The words sent a chill down Caleb's spine. There it was again, that sense of foreboding, as if the traveler knew more than he was willing to reveal. He opened his mouth to ask more, but Ethan was already stepping forward, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked eagerly. "Are you here to guide us? Do you know the way to the enchanted castle?" The traveler nodded slowly, his staff glimmering in the dappled sunlight. "I do know the way," he said, his voice now serious. "But the road you seek will not be easy. There are tests ahead, trials that will challenge not only your strength, but your heart. The enchanted castle is not merely a place of riches, it is a place where you will face your greatest fears and your deepest desires." Ethan's eyes gleamed with excitement, but Caleb felt a wave of unease wash over him. The traveler's words were heavy, his gaze unfathomable. "Tests?" Caleb repeated, his voice uncertain. "What kind of tests?" The traveler's smile was cryptic. "You will know them when you encounter them," he said. "But remember, the journey is not only about finding the castle. It is about understanding what lies within you." With that, he turned and began to walk away, his cloak swirling around him as if it were part of the very air itself. "The path will be clearer now," he called over his shoulder. "But do not rush. The forest reveals itself only to those who are patient. Ethan, though filled with questions, stood silently as the traveler disappeared into the trees. Caleb watched him go, his heart heavy with doubt. Something about the traveler's words lingered in the air, a mystery yet to be unraveled. The journey was just beginning, but already, Caleb felt as though they were being pulled into a story much larger than they had imagined. And the traveler's cryptic warning echoed in his mind: the journey is not only about finding the castle. It is about understanding what lies within you. The sun was setting as Caleb and Ethan continued their journey through the dense forest. The day had been filled with silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. The mysterious traveler had vanished as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease in Caleb's heart. Yet, Ethan was filled with an insatiable energy, his excitement only growing as they ventured deeper into the woods. As evening fell, the forest seemed to come alive with new sounds. The once distant calls of animals grew louder, and the soft glow of fireflies illuminated the path ahead. Despite the beauty of the scene, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching them, guiding them forward. It was as though the forest itself was aware of their mission, and it was testing them at every turn. Caleb, exhausted and uncertain, glanced at his brother. Ethan's face was alight with anticipation, his eyes gleaming with the dream of adventure. He was undeterred by the challenges of the journey, embracing each new obstacle with determination. It was as though he had already convinced himself that the enchanted castle was within his reach. "I can feel it, Caleb," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "We're getting closer. I know the castle is out there, waiting for us." Caleb nodded, his thoughts tangled. He wanted to believe his brother. He truly did. But the mysterious traveler's words weighed heavily on his mind. The journey is not only about finding the castle. It is about understanding what lies within you. What did that mean? What was the purpose of all this? The riches and the princess were enticing, but Caleb couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something deeper to this quest, something that involved more than just adventure. As they walked, Caleb's gaze wandered to the trees around them. The path had become narrower, the air growing cooler, and the darkness of the forest more oppressive. It was no longer the friendly woods they had once known. The atmosphere had shifted, as though they had crossed some invisible boundary into the unknown. He shivered despite the warmth of the evening. Then, from the shadows of the trees ahead, a low, melodic sound reached his ears. It was almost like a voice, soft and distant, yet strangely familiar. Caleb stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He looked at Ethan, but his brother was too caught up in the excitement of the journey to notice his hesitation. "Ethan, do you hear that?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't respond at first, too eager to keep moving. But when the sound grew louder, echoing through the trees, he stopped and listened. It was a song, a beautiful, haunting melody that seemed to weave through the very fabric of the forest. It was unlike anything Caleb had ever heard before, its notes sweet and sorrowful, filling the air with a sense of longing and mystery. "I hear it," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. "It's beautiful. Do you think it's a sign?" Caleb frowned, uncertainty creeping back into his mind. "A sign of what?" he asked, but his voice was drowned out by the pull of the song. He couldn't deny it. There was something compelling about the sound, something that made him want to follow it. Without thinking, he took a step forward, his feet moving on their own as the melody tugged at his soul. Ethan, too, seemed drawn to the sound, and the two brothers walked deeper into the forest, following the eerie music that seemed to call them toward an unknown destination. The deeper they went, the more the forest changed. The trees grew taller, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches heavy with moss and ivy. The path became less defined, the ground uneven and slippery. Yet the song continued to lead them, drawing them forward with an almost magnetic force. At last, they reached a clearing, and the source of the music was revealed. Before them stood a stone archway, half covered in ivy, its ancient stones weathered by time. The archway was flanked by two large statues, each of a fierce lion, their eyes glowing with a faint, ethereal light. The music seemed to emanate from within the archway, and Caleb could feel the magic in the air. "This must be it," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with excitement. "This is the entrance to the enchanted castle. I can feel it." But Caleb hesitated. The air around the archway seemed to hum with energy, and something about it felt off. The statues, with their glowing eyes, seemed to watch them, their stone faces unreadable. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were being tested, that the archway was not simply a passage to the castle, but a challenge, one that they were not yet ready to face. Before Caleb could voice his concerns, the music shifted, becoming more urgent. The song's rhythm quickened, and the forest around them seemed to pulse with energy. The statue's eyes gleamed brighter, and the archway seemed to shimmer with a strange, otherworldly glow. "Caleb," Ethan urged, stepping forward. "This is it. The call to adventure. We can't turn back now." Caleb looked at his brother, his heart heavy with doubt. He wanted to follow Ethan, to embrace the adventure, but something inside him whispered that they weren't ready. This was no ordinary path, no simple journey. The call to adventure was not just a song, it was a test, one that would shape their fate. But Ethan's determination was unyielding. He moved toward the archway, his hand outstretched, as though the path ahead were already his. "Come on, Caleb. We've come this far. We can't turn back now." With a deep breath, Caleb stepped forward, his hand trembling as he followed Ethan into the archway. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the air seemed to shift, and the forest behind them vanished into darkness. They were no longer in the woods, they were somewhere else. The clearing had disappeared, replaced by a vast, shimmering expanse. The ground beneath their feet was smooth and cool, like marble, and in the distance, the faint outline of the enchanted castle could be seen, glowing softly in the twilight. The call to adventure had brought them here, and there was no turning back now. The trials awaited. The path ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but the brothers were united in their quest. And no matter the obstacles that lay before them, they would face them together. The air was thick with an eerie silence as Caleb and Ethan stepped beyond the archway. The familiar sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, had vanished completely, replaced by a heavy stillness that seemed to press in on them from all sides. The ground beneath their feet felt cold, unyielding, as if the very earth itself were watching their every move. Caleb paused, looking back over his shoulder, but the archway was gone. The path they had just traveled now seemed like a distant memory, and the forest behind them had faded into shadow, leaving only the path ahead. The once cheerful song that had called them here had ceased, and now, a deep, quiet hum filled the air, a hum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. "Ethan," Caleb murmured, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "This doesn't feel right. We're not in the same place anymore. This is different." Ethan, however, was already striding forward with determination. His eyes were alight with excitement, undeterred by the strange feeling that lingered in the air. "This is it, Caleb. The deep woods. The real adventure begins now. We've come too far to turn back." Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but he didn't want to voice his fears. The last thing he wanted was to hold his brother back. So, with a deep breath, he followed, his footsteps echoing on the cold, smooth ground. As they ventured deeper into this new realm, the trees that surrounded them grew taller and more twisted. Their trunks seemed to stretch up to the sky, their branches like gnarled hands reaching out to grab them. The forest was dense, the canopy above so thick that only thin beams of moonlight pierced through, casting an otherworldly glow on the path ahead. The deeper they went, the more the woods seemed to come alive. Caleb could feel eyes watching him from the shadows, unseen creatures flitting between the trees, too swift to be caught in his gaze. Every now and then, a faint whisper would brush past his ear, too soft to decipher, but enough to send a chill down his spine. He wanted to call out to Ethan, to ask if he felt it too, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. It was as if the forest itself was urging them forward, pulling them deeper into its heart. "Look," Ethan said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was filled with awe as he pointed ahead. "Do you see that?" Caleb followed his brother's gaze, his eyes widening. Before them stood a towering tree, its bark gleaming like silver in the moonlight. The trunk was wide and thick, its roots sprawling out like the arms of an ancient giant. At its base, nestled among the roots, was a small opening, a hollow in the earth, dark and inviting. Without hesitation, Ethan started toward the tree. "This is it. This must be a sign." "We're supposed to go in." Caleb hesitated. The tree was unlike any he had ever seen before. Its glow was unnatural, its presence too imposing to be anything but magical. Something about the hollow seemed to call to him, but it was not the same as the song that had led them to the archway. This was a different kind of pull, one that spoke not to the heart, but to something deeper, older, and far more dangerous. "Wait, Ethan," Caleb said, his voice shaking. "I don't think this is safe. We don't know what's inside. We should keep moving. We don't have to go in there." Ethan shot him a look, his eyes filled with impatience. "You're always overthinking things, Caleb. This is part of the journey. The test is right in front of us. We can't ignore it." Before Caleb could protest further, Ethan stepped forward, crouching down to peer into the dark opening. There was no turning back now. Caleb watched helplessly as his brother, driven by the same unshakable desire for adventure, lowered himself into the hollow. "Ethan!" Caleb called, but his voice was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. He glanced around, feeling more and more isolated as the shadows closed in around him. With a resigned sigh, he knelt down and followed his brother into the darkness. The moment Caleb's feet touched the earth inside the hollow, the world seemed to shift. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them felt unnaturally soft, like stepping into a thick, spongy moss. The path ahead was narrow, winding through twisted roots and ancient stones. It was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the trees above. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. They walked for what felt like hours, the winding path twisting and turning, leading them deeper into the heart of the forest. At times, Caleb could hear soft, melodic whispers in the distance, too distant to understand but close enough to make his skin crawl. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. What had they gotten themselves into? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the path opened up into another clearing. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous stone statue, a woman, her face serene and calm, her outstretched arms holding a large, intricate flower. The petals of the flower seemed to glow faintly, and a soft, golden light spilled out from the center of the bloom, illuminating the clearing in a warm, otherworldly glow. Caleb felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over him as he gazed at the statue, the whispers from the forest quieting in its presence. It was as though the very air itself was filled with magic. "This is it," Ethan said softly, his voice reverent. "The heart of the deep woods. The next test awaits." But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer in control of their own destiny. The statue, the flower, the whispers, it was all too much. He looked to his brother, who seemed entranced by the beauty of the scene, and wondered if they had wandered into a place where the boundaries between reality and magic had blurred beyond recognition. The deep woods had a way of leading travelers astray. They were no longer sure what was a sign and what was a trap. Caleb couldn't help but wonder, had they come to the heart of the forest, or had the forest brought them here for its own unknown reasons? With a deep breath, Caleb turned to Ethan. "We have to be careful. This place, it's not like anything we've seen before." But Ethan, his eyes fixed on the glowing flower, only nodded absently. The adventure was calling, and there was no turning back now. The air in the clearing was thick with magic, and for a moment, Caleb forgot the unease that had plagued him since entering the deep woods. The warm glow from the flower bathed the surroundings in a soft, golden light, and a strange stillness filled the air, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Ethan, entranced by the scene, stepped closer to the statue, his eyes fixed on the intricate petals of the glowing flower. The moment his hand touched the stone, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, and a low rumble echoed through the woods. Caleb's heart skipped a beat as a deep, resonant voice seemed to rise from the statue itself, reverberating in the very air around them. "Two souls who seek the heart of the forest," the voice intoned. "To pass, you must prove your worth, not through strength, nor through wit, but through kindness. Only then will the path forward be revealed." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. Kindness? What kind of trial was this? He glanced at Ethan, who stood frozen, his fingers still lightly pressed against the stone. Ethan's eyes widened, his gaze darting from the flower to the clearing around them. But there was no time for questions. The trial had already begun. Without warning, the golden light from the flower intensified, casting long shadows across the clearing. From the edges of the forest, creatures began to emerge, beasts and beings unlike any Caleb had seen before. Some were small and delicate, with shimmering wings that fluttered like the softest of breezes, while others were larger, their eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom. They seemed peaceful, yet there was a weight to their gaze, as though they, too, were waiting to see if the brothers could meet the test. "Choose wisely," the voice echoed once more, its tone now softer, almost a whisper. "One act of kindness will guide you. One misstep, and you shall return to where you began." Ethan stepped forward, his usual bravado returning. "Don't worry, Caleb. We've faced worse than this. Let's show them what we're made of." But Caleb's unease remained. He took a deep breath and, without speaking, surveyed the creatures before them. One stood out, an injured fox, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle, dragging itself painfully through the grass. Its amber eyes flickered with fear as it noticed the brothers. A soft whimper escaped its lips, and Caleb instinctively took a step forward, his heart aching for the creature. But before Caleb could act, Ethan was already rushing toward it. "It's just a fox, Caleb. It's not going to stop us," he muttered as he knelt beside the animal. He examined the leg and, without hesitation, tried to lift the fox's limp body to carry it away. The fox yelped in pain, struggling against Ethan's grip. Caleb watched, a knot of tension tightening in his chest. Ethan's impatience was evident, his hands rough as they tried to move the injured animal, while the fox whimpered in distress. Something didn't sit right with Caleb. This wasn't kindness, it was haste, an attempt to solve the problem without truly understanding it. "Ethan, wait," Caleb said urgently, stepping forward to stop his brother. "You're hurting it." Ethan stopped, looking at Caleb in surprise. "I'm just trying to help it, Caleb." But Caleb shook his head, crouching down slowly to the fox's level. He spoke gently, his voice calm and soothing. "It's scared, Ethan. It needs comfort, not to be moved so quickly." Ethan frowned but stepped back, his eyes flashing with frustration. Caleb reached out slowly, placing his hand on the fox's fur, and allowed it to sniff his fingers. The animal hesitated for a moment before relaxing slightly, its body no longer rigid with fear. Caleb gently took the fox's injured leg in his hands, examining it carefully. "It's not broken," he murmured, relief flooding through him. "Just sprained. It needs rest, not to be carried." Carefully, Caleb helped the fox lie down on the soft moss. He whispered quiet reassurances to it, and after a few moments, the fox's breathing slowed, its eyes closing in peaceful surrender. The sharpness of its pain had dulled, replaced by the warmth of trust. Caleb stood, watching the fox for a moment before turning to Ethan. The older brother's face was flushed with a mixture of frustration and confusion, his eyes still wide as he took in what Caleb had done. "You didn't need to coddle it like that," Ethan muttered, but there was no real heat in his words. "It's just an animal." "But that's the point," Caleb said quietly, looking at his brother. "Kindness doesn't rush to fix things. It takes the time to understand what's needed, even if it's just a moment of care. You can't just solve everything with speed and force." Ethan's gaze softened slightly as he looked down at the fox, now resting peacefully. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. I guess I wasn't thinking. I wanted to keep moving forward." "That's always been your way," Caleb replied gently. "But sometimes, Ethan, the right path is the one you take slowly." The ground beneath their feet trembled again, and the air around them shifted, as if something invisible had moved through the clearing. A soft rustling sound filled the space, and then the voice spoke again, this time filled with approval. "You have passed the first trial," the voice said. "You have shown kindness not in grand gestures, but in patience and understanding. The way forward is now open to you." Ethan looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. We did it?" Caleb smiled softly, nodding. "Yes. The way forward is always clearer when you act with a kind heart." The forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the creatures that had watched them began to fade into the shadows once more. The golden light from the flower softened, and the statue's serene face seemed to smile down at them. Without another word, Caleb took Ethan's hand, and together, they turned to face the path that now stretched before them. It was no longer dark or ominous. Now, the forest ahead seemed to open up with possibility, the way forward clear and waiting. The next part of their journey would undoubtedly bring more trials, but Caleb knew one thing for certain: with each step, they would become stronger, not because of their strength or their wit, but because of the kindness they showed along the way. The journey through the deep woods had been long and tiring, but Caleb felt a sense of relief now that they had passed the first test. The path ahead seemed lighter, more promising. Ethan walked beside him, his usual swagger subdued, his thoughts clearly preoccupied by the strange trial they had just endured. "You think we'll find more of those strange tests ahead?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain. His earlier confidence had faded, replaced by a wariness Caleb hadn't seen in him before. "I don't know," Caleb replied, glancing at the dense forest that stretched before them. "But we'll have to be ready. Whatever comes next, we can face it together." Ethan nodded, though his eyes remained distant. As the brothers continued, the woods seemed to close in around them once more, and the air grew thick with the hum of unseen creatures. The trees here were ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, the canopy above so dense that only occasional shafts of light pierced through the leaves. It was Caleb's sharp eyes that first caught sight of the unusual sight ahead. In a small clearing, the ground seemed to shimmer, as if it was covered with a layer of golden dust. As they drew closer, they realized it wasn't dust at all, but tiny golden ants, moving in perfect formation across the forest floor. Their bodies glinted in the sunlight like miniature jewels, and the sight was mesmerizing. "Look at them," Caleb whispered in awe. "Golden ants. I've never seen anything like this." Ethan, who had been too absorbed in his thoughts to notice, glanced up sharply. "What's so special about ants?" "We don't have time for this, Caleb." But Caleb was already stepping forward, his gaze fixed on the ants, which seemed to be working together in a purposeful way. He crouched down, watching in fascination as the golden ants carried small fragments of twigs and leaves, creating intricate patterns across the forest floor. "They're not just ants," Caleb said, his voice full of wonder. "They're building something. They're organizing, planning." Ethan shook his head, clearly growing impatient. "It's just nature doing its thing. Come on, we need to move." But Caleb hesitated. There was something about the golden ants that tugged at him, something that felt important. He studied the ants carefully, noticing that one group had gathered around a small opening in the ground, where a hollow space lay hidden beneath a thick layer of leaves. Without thinking, Caleb reached out and gently moved some of the leaves aside. Beneath them, he found a large, intricate nest made of woven twigs and small fragments of golden material. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, both natural and magical in its design, its beauty almost otherworldly. As he reached out to touch it, a sudden, low buzz filled the air, and the golden ants shifted, forming a protective circle around him. Caleb froze, unsure of what to do. But then, from the center of the circle, an ant the size of a human hand crawled forward, its antennae twitching. The others parted to allow it through, and it moved toward Caleb with an air of authority, its golden body gleaming in the dim light. Ethan, seeing the situation becoming tense, stepped back, but Caleb remained still, watching the queen ant approach. It paused in front of him, its antennae waving gently as if sensing his intentions. For a long moment, there was nothing but the soft rustling of the forest and the gentle hum of the ants around them. Then, to Caleb's surprise, the queen ant raised her body, slowly reaching out with one of her front legs, as if offering it to him. "I think she wants me to help," Caleb murmured, his voice filled with awe. He glanced up at Ethan, who now stood watching with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Help? Help with what?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with doubt. Caleb hesitated for a moment. He wasn't entirely sure what the queen ant wanted from him, but something in her movements felt purposeful, an invitation, not a command. Carefully, Caleb extended his hand and gently placed it in front of the queen. Her antennae brushed against his fingers, and for a moment, it was as if the forest around him grew still, the air charged with an ancient energy. Then, as if in response to Caleb's touch, the ground beneath them rumbled softly, and the golden ants scattered, creating a clear path that led further into the woods. At the end of the path, Caleb could see something glimmering in the distance, something that beckoned to him. The queen ant buzzed softly again, as if offering her blessing. Caleb nodded slowly, understanding that this was no ordinary encounter. The ants weren't just part of the forest, they were guardians, protectors of something important. Ethan stepped forward, his skepticism still evident, but there was a flicker of intrigue in his eyes. "So, what now? Do we follow them?" Caleb glanced at the path ahead, then back at the queen ant, who had already begun to retreat into the shadows with her colony. "I think we have to. The ants are guiding us." Without further hesitation, the brothers set off down the newly revealed path, the golden ants trailing behind them in perfect formation. As they walked, Caleb couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something much greater, something he hadn't fully understood yet, but which seemed to be unfolding before them. The deeper they ventured, the more Caleb felt the pull of magic in the air, thick and heavy, like an unseen force weaving its way through the trees. The ants, ever faithful, continued to guide them, their golden bodies shimmering like stars in the fading light. Soon, they arrived at a small clearing, where the path ended at the base of an ancient oak tree. Its gnarled roots spread out like a vast network, twisting and turning beneath the earth. At the foot of the tree, Caleb saw a small, intricately carved stone, half hidden by the roots. The ants gathered around it, as if waiting for something. Caleb stepped forward, kneeling down to examine the stone. There was a symbol etched into it, one that he had seen before, on the statue they had encountered earlier, the one with the golden flower. The symbol was the same, a delicate swirl surrounded by a series of runes. "This must be part of the second test," Caleb murmured. "It's like a key, a clue to what comes next." Ethan looked down at the stone, then back at the path behind them, his expression still uncertain. "Do you think we're ready for whatever this is?" Caleb glanced at him, his heart steady with resolve. "We've come this far. And I know we're not alone." The ants are guiding us. The path ahead remained uncertain, but with the help of the golden ants and the growing sense that they were on the right path, Caleb felt a spark of hope. The journey would be long, and the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet understand. But together, they would face whatever came next, just as they had faced the first trial, with patience, kindness, and trust in the magic that surrounded them. The golden ants had shown them the way. And Caleb knew that, no matter what, he would not turn back. The path beyond the oak tree twisted through the thick forest, leading the brothers deeper into the heart of the enchanted woods. Caleb's steps were light, his heart buoyed by the strange magic they had encountered and the guidance of the golden ants. Ethan, though still guarded, walked beside him, the weight of the journey and the mysteries ahead pressing down on him. His silence had become a steady companion, but Caleb could tell that his brother was beginning to feel the pull of something greater, something far beyond the simple life they had known. The air grew thicker as they walked, tinged with an otherworldly stillness. The sunlight barely broke through the dense canopy above, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and change with every step. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching them, waiting for their next move. At last, after what seemed like an eternity of walking, they reached the edge of a vast, shimmering lake. The water was still, its surface like glass, reflecting the trees and the sky in perfect detail. It was as if the lake were a mirror to another world, one that Caleb couldn't quite understand but felt drawn to nonetheless. The golden ants had long since disappeared, retreating into the woods behind them, but the lake stood before them like an invitation. Caleb knelt beside the water, gazing into its depths, where the reflection of the trees was mirrored in the clear, almost unnatural stillness of the water. There was something hypnotic about it, something that seemed to draw him in. Ethan, ever the skeptic, stood a few paces back, his arms crossed. "So, this is it, huh? The next test?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He felt an unsettling sensation, as though the lake was waiting for them to make a choice, one that could change everything. He was hesitant to disturb the surface, but there was a pull, an invisible thread guiding him forward. As he leaned closer to the water, the reflection of the trees began to warp and shift, and the surface seemed to ripple despite the lack of wind. "Caleb," Ethan called, his voice tense, "what do you think is going to happen here?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted, his voice quiet. "But I think this lake holds something we need." As if to answer Caleb's thoughts, a soft breeze stirred the surface of the water, sending ripples through the reflection of the trees. The lake began to glow with a soft, ethereal light, casting an unearthly glow on the forest around them. A voice, barely audible at first, echoed from the depths of the lake, its tone distant and sorrowful. "Who dares to gaze upon the lake of reflection?" the voice asked, its words carrying an ancient weight. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "Did you hear that?" Caleb nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the shimmering water. "I think we're meant to answer." The voice returned, this time clearer, more insistent. "Only those with the courage to confront their truth may pass. The reflection shall reveal what lies hidden within." With a deep breath, Caleb stepped forward, his heart racing. He knew that whatever lay ahead, it was not just a test of physical strength or skill, it was a test of the heart. The lake of reflection did not simply reflect the world around them, it reflected the very essence of their souls, their fears, their desires, and their regrets. Caleb knelt at the water's edge and placed his hand gently on the surface. The water began to shimmer and ripple beneath his touch, and the reflection of the trees and sky shifted. Slowly, a figure began to form within the water, a shadowy outline that grew clearer with each passing moment. It was Caleb's own reflection, but distorted. The image was darker, more uncertain, as if something was missing. He could see himself standing, but the figure before him seemed distant, unreachable. His heart clenched as the reflection spoke, its voice a distorted echo of his own. "Are you truly ready to face the trials ahead, Caleb?" the reflection asked, its voice hollow and cold. "You seek to break the enchantment, to awaken the princess, but what will it cost you? What will you sacrifice?" Caleb's throat tightened as the reflection's words sank in. He had always been driven by a sense of duty, a desire to protect those he loved. But the question lingered in his mind: what was he willing to give up for this quest? What part of himself would he need to leave behind to succeed? Before he could answer, the reflection morphed, shifting into a different image. It was his father, his kind face twisted with sorrow and regret. The vision of his father gazed at Caleb with sad eyes, and Caleb's heart wrenched as he saw the unspoken disappointment in his eyes. "Will you leave me behind, Caleb?" the reflection of his father whispered. "Will you forget the life we built together, the love that binds us?" Caleb recoiled, his hand trembling as he withdrew from the water. The reflection of his father faded, but the weight of the question hung in the air, suffocating him. He had never considered the toll this journey might take on his family. He had always assumed that his father would be waiting for him when he returned, but now he wasn't so sure. The voice of the lake echoed again, this time softer, more compassionate. "The lake of reflection shows you what you fear most. It reveals the choices you must make. But remember, Caleb, true strength lies not in running from these truths, but in embracing them." Caleb took a deep breath, steadying himself. The reflection had shown him the doubts he carried, the fears he had hidden deep within. But it had also shown him his love for his family and his sense of duty. He knew he couldn't allow fear to hold him back. He had made a choice. He had committed to this journey, to this quest. And though it might cost him dearly, he would see it through. He looked at Ethan, who stood a little way off, watching him with a mix of concern and curiosity. Caleb's voice was steady now as he spoke. "I've seen what I need to see. The reflection doesn't just show us who we are, it shows us who we can be." Ethan nodded slowly, though he still looked uncertain. "And what now?" Caleb stood up, his heart resolute. "Now we face whatever comes next. Together." With that, Caleb turned away from the lake, the mysterious voice fading into the distance. The stillness returned to the forest, but Caleb knew that he was no longer the same. The lake of reflection had shown him the depths of his fears, but it had also shown him his strength. Whatever trials lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Together, they would continue the journey. The forest seemed quieter now, the oppressive stillness of the lake of reflection lifting as Caleb and Ethan continued on their journey. The road ahead remained uncertain, and the weight of the trials that lay before them still lingered, but Caleb felt a renewed sense of resolve. The lake had revealed his deepest fears and doubts, but it had also reminded him of the strength he carried within, strength forged in the love of his family, the trust he placed in his brother, and the quiet courage that guided him forward. Ethan, however, seemed different. The bravado that had once fueled his every step was tempered now, replaced by a contemplative silence. Caleb could see the change in him, a growing awareness that the quest was not merely a path to glory or riches, it was a path of personal transformation. But there was still a lingering restlessness in Ethan's gaze, a hunger for something more, something greater than what he had known. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of the journey pressing down on them, until a strange sound broke the stillness, a soft fluttering, like the rustling of wings. Caleb looked up, his senses alert, and saw a flock of birds flying high above them. The birds moved in perfect harmony, their wings beating as one, gliding gracefully over the treetops. They were unlike any birds Caleb had ever seen, larger, their feathers shimmering with an ethereal glow, as though they carried the light of the moon within them. "They look like," Ethan began, squinting upward, "angels, don't they?" Caleb nodded. The birds seemed to pulse with a strange energy, their movements so fluid and effortless that it seemed almost unreal. As the birds passed overhead, one of them veered from the flock and descended toward the brothers, its wings glimmering like stars against the twilight sky. It circled above them, swooping low, before landing on a nearby branch with an almost regal poise. The bird was no ordinary creature. Its feathers were a deep shade of silver, and its eyes, large and gleaming with intelligence, met Caleb's gaze directly, as if it recognized him, as if it knew him. Ethan stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "What do you think it wants?" Before Caleb could respond, the bird opened its beak, and to their astonishment, it spoke in a voice as clear and melodic as the sound of a distant bell. "You seek the enchanted castle, do you not?" the bird asked, its voice both wise and gentle. Caleb felt a surge of awe at the unexpected words. He glanced at Ethan, whose brow furrowed with confusion. "We do," Caleb replied cautiously. "But we do not know what lies ahead." We have already faced trials, and there are more to come. Who are you? The bird tilted its head, its wings fluttering softly as if in amusement. I am called Zephyra, it said. I am a messenger of the winds, a guardian of the skies. I have watched over you, and I have seen your hearts. You have faced the trials of kindness, of patience, of wisdom, and now you must face the trial of courage and trust. The road to the enchanted castle is fraught with danger, but you do not walk it alone. Ethan's eyes widened. What do you mean? You've been watching us? Zephyra nodded. In a way, yes. The world is full of unseen forces, and I have been sent to aid those who are worthy. I have seen your bond, your shared purpose. But I have also seen the doubts that cloud your path. There is one final test you must pass before you can enter the castle's gates. And that test is not for one to face alone. The bird's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Caleb could sense that this was a pivotal moment in their journey, an opportunity to understand something deeper than just the physical challenges ahead. It wasn't just about reaching the castle or breaking the enchantment. It was about something more profound, something that would shape their fates in ways they could not yet understand. Ethan, still skeptical, stepped forward. What do we have to do? Zephyra's wings fluttered once more, and she hopped to a higher branch, her eyes fixed on the brothers with an expression that seemed almost knowing. The road ahead will test not just your strength, but your trust in each other, she said. The castle cannot be reached by sheer will or ambition. It must be entered with open hearts, willing to accept help, to share in the burdens of the journey. You will meet others along the way, some who will offer aid, others who may seem to deceive you. But remember this, it is not enough to walk this path alone, no matter how strong or clever you are. Caleb absorbed the bird's words, feeling their weight. It wasn't just the trials ahead that would define their success, it was how they chose to face them, together. You will need more than just the strength of your hands or the sharpness of your mind, Zephyra continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. You must open your hearts to the unknown and trust in the bonds that tie you to each other. That is the only way you will succeed. The bird paused, as if waiting for them to fully comprehend what she was saying. Then, with a soft chirp, she fluttered her wings once more and took flight, circling above them. Remember, she called, her voice drifting through the air like a distant breeze, the wings of friendship will carry you farther than you can go alone. Trust in each other, and the way will become clear. As Zephyra disappeared into the sky, the brothers stood in silence, the weight of her words settling over them. Ethan was the first to speak, his voice quieter than before. I didn't think I needed help. I thought I could do this on my own. But I think I understand now. Caleb looked at his brother, a small smile tugging at his lips. None of us can do this alone. We have each other. Ethan nodded, his expression softening. Together, then. The two brothers shared a look, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They knew the road ahead would be perilous, and the challenges would only grow more difficult. But now, more than ever, they knew that the true strength of their journey lay not in their individual abilities, but in their shared resolve, their trust in each other, and the friendships they would forge along the way. And with that, they turned back to the path, ready to face whatever lay ahead, together, with the wings of friendship guiding them forward. The forest, once alive with the whispers of the wind and the fluttering of wings, had grown silent again as the brothers pressed onward. The path before them was now unfamiliar, winding through trees that towered higher than any they had seen before, their gnarled roots stretching out like ancient fingers. The air had changed too, thick with an eerie stillness, heavy with magic, as though the very ground they walked upon was charged with a force beyond their comprehension. Ethan and Caleb moved with a quiet urgency, the words of Zephyrus still echoing in their minds. The road ahead would test their bond, their courage, and their willingness to trust each other and those they would meet along the way. But even so, the final destination loomed ahead, a promise of something far greater than any treasure or glory. Then, as they rounded a bend in the path, they saw it, a gate, old and grand, standing at the edge of a clearing. It was unlike any gate they had ever seen before. Made of intricately twisted silver and gold, it shimmered with an otherworldly light, as though it were part of the very fabric of the forest itself. The gate was tall, reaching high into the canopy, its frame adorned with delicate vines that seemed to pulse with a gentle energy. Strange runes, glowing faintly in a language neither of them understood, were etched into its surface. Caleb stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The gate was beautiful, but it felt intimidating, as though it were a barrier to something both wonderful and dangerous. "This must be it," Caleb said quietly, his voice full of awe. "The enchanted castle is beyond this gate." Ethan stepped forward, his earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. "We've come this far. Let's not stop now." His voice was strong, but there was a tremor in it that betrayed the uncertainty he still carried in his heart. He reached out to touch the gate, but as his hand brushed the surface, a soft, musical chime rang out, and the gate shifted, moving as though it had a life of its own. "Who seeks entry to the enchanted castle?" A deep, melodic voice rang out from within the gate, its source impossible to determine. The brothers exchanged startled glances, their hearts racing. We seek the princess," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the unease that gripped him. "We seek to break the enchantment." The gate shimmered once more, and for a moment, it seemed as though the air around them thickened, becoming heavier, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The runes on the gate glowed brighter, their meaning still a mystery, but their power undeniable. "You seek the princess," the voice repeated, this time with a note of amusement. "But are you worthy of the challenge that lies ahead?" The question hung in the air, weighted with unspoken implications. Ethan stepped forward, his chin raised, eager to prove himself. "We've already faced trials. "We're ready." The voice chuckled, a sound that seemed to come from all directions. "Trials? Yes, you've passed some, but there are many more yet to come. The path to the princess is not a simple one. It is a path of choices, choices that will shape your fate, and the fate of those you hold dear." Caleb's heart thudded in his chest. "What do you mean? What choices?" The gate rumbled softly, and the voice responded, "The first of your choices awaits. The gate will not open unless one of you crosses it alone. A test of trust and sacrifice. You must decide who will cross and who will remain behind." Ethan looked at Caleb, his brow furrowed with confusion and disbelief. "What? We can't both go through?" The voice answered, as though it had read his thoughts. "The castle cannot be entered by those who are unwilling to face the truth of their own hearts. Only one can enter. You will each choose whether to trust the other, or whether to face the challenge alone." The air around them felt thick, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Caleb glanced at Ethan, who met his eyes, his expression conflicted. They had come so far together, how could they separate now? Caleb's thoughts turned to the trials they had already faced, the kindness they had shown the ants, the ducks, the bees. They had succeeded because they had trusted in each other, because they had supported each other in moments of doubt and uncertainty. But this test was different. This test would ask them to trust not only in each other, but in their own hearts, in their own decisions. "I won't leave you behind," Caleb said quietly, his voice resolute. "If I must be the one to go through, I will. But I won't leave you behind, Ethan." Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment, Caleb could see the vulnerability behind his brother's confident exterior. "I don't know if I can do this, Caleb. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do." Caleb stepped closer, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Whatever happens, we'll get through this. Together. Even if the road ahead is different, we're not leaving each other." The gate rumbled again, the voice returning, this time gentler. "Your hearts are true, brothers. The path you take will not be easy, but it is yours to walk. The castle awaits." And with that, the gate slowly began to open, its heavy doors swinging wide, revealing a path shrouded in mist. The castle lay beyond, its towering spires faintly visible in the distance, but the way forward was unclear, the path uncertain. Caleb turned to Ethan, his voice steady. "Let's go." Together, they stepped forward, their steps echoing in the stillness of the enchanted forest, as the gate closed softly behind them. The journey was far from over, and the trials ahead would demand everything from them, but one thing was certain: they would face them together, with courage, trust, and the strength of their bond. The enchanted castle awaited, its secrets hidden within the mists, but Caleb and Ethan were ready. The path through the mist was long, winding, and eerily quiet. The faint scent of jasmine and moss hung in the air, mingling with the cool, crisp breeze that brushed against their faces as they walked. Each step seemed to echo in the stillness, amplifying the brothers' feelings of trepidation. The atmosphere was unlike anything they had experienced before, calm yet foreboding, peaceful yet laden with an unsettling energy. After what felt like hours, the mist parted, and the brothers found themselves standing at the foot of an ancient stone staircase, its steps worn from the passage of time. At the top, a massive wooden door stood ajar, its surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer with the faintest light, as if alive. Caleb felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end as they approached, but Ethan strode forward without hesitation, his resolve firm. "Ready?" Ethan asked, turning to Caleb, his voice low. Caleb nodded, though a knot had formed in his stomach. They had passed through the gate, but the true test, whatever lay within the enchanted castle, was only just beginning. They pushed the door open, and as they stepped inside, they were greeted by a sight that both awed and unnerved them, a vast hall, grand and ornate, stretching far into the distance. The ceiling was impossibly high, adorned with delicate chandeliers that flickered with a soft, otherworldly light. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting scenes of royal life, beautiful, peaceful, but somehow frozen in time. But it was the people that drew their attention the most. In the center of the room, rows upon rows of figures lay slumbering on grand four-poster beds, their bodies draped in fine silks and velvets, their faces serene, as though they were merely resting. Their chests rose and fell with the rhythm of sleep, but there was no waking. No movement beyond the faint rise and fall of their breaths. The hall stretched endlessly, with countless beds lining both sides. The brothers stood at the entrance, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what lay before them. It was as though the entire castle had fallen into a deep slumber, not just the princess, but an entire court, kings, queens, nobles, soldiers, and servants. Every soul in the kingdom seemed to have been claimed by the enchantment. "Where do we start?" Caleb whispered, his voice barely a breath as he gazed around the room. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes scanning the rows of sleepers. "We find her," he said, his tone determined. "We find the princess." The brothers moved carefully through the hall, walking among the sleeping figures. Their footsteps were muffled by the thick rugs beneath them, and they spoke little, both lost in the gravity of their task. Each bed they passed held a person frozen in a dreamless slumber, some older, some younger, but all with the same peaceful expression. It was as though the entire kingdom had been caught in time. As they approached the end of the hall, they saw a pedestal in the center of the room, its surface adorned with a small silver box. The box glowed faintly, casting a soft light that illuminated the space around it. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. This must be it, the key to awakening the curse, the object that held the answers they sought. But before they could move closer, a voice echoed through the hall, the sound smooth and ancient, reverberating off the walls. "Who dares enter the sleeping hall?" The brothers froze, their eyes darting around in search of the source of the voice, but they saw no one. The figure of the speaker was unseen, yet the voice seemed to come from every corner of the room. "We come seeking the princess," Caleb called out, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "We wish to break the curse." The voice hummed softly, as if considering Caleb's words. Then, it spoke again. "The princess sleeps, and so do all who reside here. The curse cannot be broken by the weak of heart, nor the reckless of mind. You have come far, but you must prove your worth." A low hum filled the room, and the once peaceful faces of the sleepers began to shift, their expressions subtly changing. The serenity they once held dissolved into expressions of sorrow, fear, and longing. Caleb's heart clenched at the sight, the weight of their plight heavy on his chest. "Please," Caleb said, his voice softer now, his words almost pleading. "We only wish to wake her, to end the suffering." The voice answered, its tone much colder now. "To awaken her, you must prove your character. To break the enchantment, you must show your strength of will, your heart's true purpose. Only then will the path be revealed." Caleb turned to Ethan, the determination in his eyes matching the resolve he felt within himself. They had already overcome so much, and they would face whatever test lay before them with the same courage they had shown up until now. But this was different. The magic in this castle was ancient, and the tests they would face here would not be easily overcome. "We will prove our worth," Ethan said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We will face whatever trial you lay before us." For a moment, the voice fell silent, and the brothers stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by the sleeping forms of the court. Then, the voice spoke again, this time softer, as though it had been waiting for this moment. "Very well. The first trial begins now. Prepare yourselves." The air seemed to pulse with a sudden energy, and the floor beneath the brothers' feet shifted, as though the very castle itself had come to life. The sleeping hall, once still and silent, now hummed with an otherworldly power. The brothers looked at each other, fear and determination both shining in their eyes. They had entered the heart of the castle, and the true test was about to begin. The moment the voice faded into silence, a deep rumble reverberated through the hall, and the ground beneath the brothers' feet began to tremble. The room shimmered, and the tranquil surroundings of the sleeping hall faded into a surreal vision. A garden, lush and overgrown, appeared before them. The once majestic walls were now vines and ivy, the air thick with the scent of earth and blooming flowers. The peacefulness of the castle was replaced with a quiet, persistent buzzing of activity. In the distance, a figure emerged, an ethereal woman, glowing faintly, her presence commanding yet gentle. She stood with her arms folded, watching the brothers closely. Her robes swayed like the rustling leaves of the trees around them. "The first test," the voice spoke, now coming from the woman, who was revealed as the guardian of the trial. "Patience is the key to unlocking what you seek. You will be given a task, a simple one, at first glance. But know this, your perseverance will be tested to the fullest. The curse cannot be broken by those who cannot wait. If you wish to awaken the princess, you must first prove that you can wait for the right moment, even when the task seems impossible. The woman's gaze softened, and a garden appeared in front of the brothers. In the center was a large patch of earth, the soil rich and dark. But scattered across the patch were thousands of tiny, delicate seeds, bright, colorful, and fragile. The task was clear. You are to gather 1,000 seeds, the woman's voice echoed. Each seed must be carefully harvested from the garden, and you must place them all in this basket before the sun sets. Fail, and the curse will remain in place. The garden stretched on for what seemed like miles, with seeds scattered across the ground in every direction. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden rays on the vibrant blooms that surrounded them. Birds chirped and the wind whispered, but there was no hint of the passage of time. The sun hung motionless in the sky, offering no clues as to how long they had before the test ended. Ethan wasted no time. He rushed forward, his hands already grabbing handfuls of the colorful seeds. "This is nothing," he muttered, his voice brimming with impatience. "We'll have this done in no time. I'm not going to stand around waiting like some fool." He flung the seeds into the basket carelessly, his movements swift and erratic. He grabbed more seeds with each step, his frustration mounting as he saw how little progress he had made. The basket was quickly filling, but it was clear to Caleb that Ethan's method was far from efficient. Caleb, meanwhile, moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. He crouched down carefully beside the first patch of seeds he saw, inspecting each one closely before picking it up. He placed it gently in the basket, making sure that none of the delicate seeds were crushed or damaged. His focus was intense, and he worked steadily, his mind determined to complete the task, no matter how long it took. Ethan shot him a glance as he rushed past, a slight sneer on his face. "Come on, Caleb. This is taking forever. We need to hurry if we're going to finish before the sun sets. Don't be so slow. The faster we move, the more we get done." Caleb did not answer. He simply continued with his task, his movements calm and steady. He could feel the tension in the air, but he also sensed that this was a trial of more than just physical effort. The patience required wasn't just about moving slowly, it was about staying composed, keeping focus even when it seemed like the task was endless. Ethan's impatience grew with every passing minute. His basket, although filled quickly, was overflowing with hastily gathered seeds. He stopped only to collect more, his eyes darting around the garden, desperate to finish as fast as possible. Yet, no matter how quickly he worked, the garden seemed endless, the seeds scattered further than he could reach. A sharp sigh escaped his lips as he tossed a handful of seeds into his basket, clearly frustrated. He wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing around at Caleb, who was still working quietly, his hands gentle and patient. "Why are you so slow?" Ethan muttered under his breath. "This is ridiculous. We're never going to finish if you keep taking your time." Caleb did not respond to the provocation. He was used to his brother's impatience by now. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, picking each seed with care and placing it into his basket with precision. He could feel the seconds, the minutes, passing by, but he refused to let the pressure get to him. As time wore on, the tension in the air seemed to grow. The sun hung low in the sky, and Caleb noticed that the light was beginning to shift. What had been bright and full of life was now softening, the colors of the sky turning into shades of gold and lavender. Ethan's frustration was palpable. He was now running through the garden, flinging seeds haphazardly into the basket, his movements becoming increasingly erratic. He tripped over vines and stumbled into bushes, but his determination to finish quickly blinded him to the fact that he was not working efficiently. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Caleb glanced down at his basket. It was nearly full, carefully, methodically packed with the seeds he had gathered over the past hours. He turned to see Ethan still rushing, his basket a mess of unorganized seeds. Ethan's face was flushed with frustration, his brow furrowed in a mix of exhaustion and anger. The sky was nearly dark now, and Caleb knew that the test was coming to its end. He placed the last seed into his basket and stood, waiting quietly. The woman, the guardian of the trial, appeared before them once more. Ethan, breathless and angry, stood at the ready. "I'm done. I finished it. We don't need to wait any longer. Let's go." The woman raised her hand, her gaze solemn as she looked over the baskets. She inspected Caleb's carefully gathered seeds first, nodding with approval at their arrangement. But when she turned to Ethan, her eyes softened in disappointment. The seeds in his basket were jumbled and scattered, a disorganized mess. Despite his haste, he had not completed the task with the care required. "You have failed the first test," the woman said, her voice carrying a tone of finality. "Impatience does not lead to success." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "But I finished first. How can this be?" The woman simply nodded toward Caleb's basket. "It is not about finishing first, but finishing with the right heart. Patience, my child, is the key to unlocking the enchantment." Ethan stood silent, his chest heaving with frustration, but Caleb felt no triumph. He had succeeded, but he also understood the weight of the lesson. True success came not from rushing or forcing things, but from waiting for the right moment and working with care. As the last rays of the sun disappeared, the garden around them began to fade, and the brothers stood together once more, the weight of the trial sinking in. The first test was complete, but the journey ahead would require much more than patience alone. As the first test came to an end, Caleb stood quietly, his heart still heavy with the weight of the task. He had succeeded through patience, but he could feel that this was only the beginning of the trials that awaited them. Ethan, still bitter about his failure, had said nothing since the woman's judgment. He stood beside Caleb, his arms crossed, his eyes downcast. The woman, her figure now shimmering in the dim light of the fading sun, approached them again. Her presence was calm, almost soothing, but Caleb could sense the gravity of what was to come. "You have passed the first test," she spoke, her voice soft yet commanding. "But the journey is far from over. The second test awaits you, and this time, it will demand more than patience. It will test your courage and your resolve." The ground around them shifted again, and the tranquil garden dissolved into a vast, shimmering lake. The air grew cooler, and the scent of water and earth replaced the fragrant flowers they had just left behind. The lake stretched out before them, its surface still and glassy, reflecting the low-hanging moon that had risen in the sky. Tall trees lined its edge, their branches bending slightly as if they, too, were waiting for something. Caleb stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the still water. The lake seemed endless, a deep expanse that stretched beyond the horizon. He could feel the weight of the woman's gaze on him as she gestured toward the water. "There lies your task," she said, her voice steady and unflinching. "A key is hidden at the bottom of this lake, a golden key, and it is the key to unlocking the next part of this journey. You must retrieve it before the dawn breaks. But beware, the depths of the lake are treacherous, and the waters are not as they appear." Ethan stepped forward eagerly, his gaze fixed on the shimmering surface of the water. "This is easy," he said, a smug smile spreading across his face. "I can dive down and get it in no time." But the woman shook her head. "The key lies at the bottom, yes. But the deeper you go, the more you will face your fears. You will be tested not just by the water, but by the very depths of your own heart. The key cannot be retrieved by force alone." Caleb felt a cold shiver run through him as the words sank in. He had heard tales of enchanted lakes and the creatures that lived within them, but he had never imagined that he would be tasked with retrieving something from such a mysterious and potentially dangerous place. Without another word, the woman stepped aside, and Caleb and Ethan were left standing at the water's edge, the lake's dark surface reflecting the stars above. The only sound was the soft rustle of the trees and the occasional ripple of the water. Ethan immediately stripped off his coat, eager to dive in. "I'll show you how it's done, Caleb," he said, his voice full of confidence. "I'll get the key before you even know it." He took a deep breath, plunged into the water, and disappeared beneath the surface. Caleb watched, his heart pounding as he listened to the muffled sounds of his brother swimming. The stillness of the lake seemed to grow, and Caleb found himself staring at the inky depths, a strange sensation of unease filling his chest. Moments passed, and Caleb's anxiety grew. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing on him. Ethan had not returned, and the longer he waited, the more Caleb's concerns deepened. The still water seemed to mock him, calm on the surface, but hiding secrets in its depths. He knew that his brother's impulsive nature would only carry him so far in this trial. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Caleb could hear splashing. His brother's head broke through the water, his face flushed with exertion. "I've been diving down, Caleb," Ethan called, his voice tinged with frustration. "I can't see the bottom. It's too deep. The key isn't there, or it's buried, or..." Before he could finish, Caleb's eyes were drawn to something glimmering in the depths, far below the surface. It was faint, but unmistakable, the golden key. His heart quickened as he realized that the key was real, and it lay waiting for someone with the patience and courage to retrieve it. Turning back to Ethan, Caleb spoke softly but firmly, "I'm going to try." "You can't rush something like this." Ethan scoffed. "You're just scared." "I can do it, just watch me." But Caleb ignored him, his gaze fixed on the shimmering key below. He had a feeling that the key wasn't just a physical object. It was a test of something deeper, something he hadn't fully understood yet. This trial was about more than swimming to the bottom, it was about facing his own doubts, confronting what lay beneath the surface. Taking a deep breath, Caleb dove into the lake. The cold water enveloped him immediately, the chill seeping into his bones. He swam down slowly, trying to steady his breathing, the weight of the water pressing against him. The further he descended, the darker it became, and the sound of his own heartbeat seemed to grow louder. As he descended deeper, Caleb began to see shadows in the water, vague shapes that seemed to move in and out of his vision. Strange, shifting creatures brushed against him, swirling fish, drifting plants, and the occasional flicker of something just out of reach. The deeper he went, the more his heart raced. Was this part of the trial? Was the water itself trying to scare him? He pushed on, focused on the golden light that grew brighter the deeper he swam. It was almost within his grasp, but the water grew colder, and a sense of fear gnawed at his mind. He had to trust that the key would lead him to the right place, that the task was more about overcoming his own fears than just retrieving the object. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Caleb's fingers brushed the golden key. With a final burst of effort, he grasped it firmly in his hand, feeling its warmth even beneath the cold water. But as he turned to swim back to the surface, the dark shadows that had once seemed distant now closed in around him. The pressure of the water seemed to increase, and his thoughts became clouded by the eerie silence beneath the surface. But Caleb knew that his courage would see him through. He kicked his legs, pushing himself upward, his body screaming for air. The darkness pressed in, but the light above grew brighter, and with a final powerful stroke, he broke through the surface of the water. Gasping for air, Caleb pulled himself onto the shore, his chest heaving. The key was still clutched in his hand, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He held it out to the woman, his expression weary but resolute. "You have passed the second test," she said, her voice a soft murmur of approval. "You faced the depths, and in doing so, you faced your fears. The key is yours." Caleb's body was trembling, but there was a sense of peace that settled over him. The task had been difficult, yes, but it had taught him something about himself, about the courage to face what lay beneath the surface, both in the water and in his heart. Ethan, who had been watching from the shore, was silent. His own frustration was clear, but there was a hint of respect in his gaze now as he looked at Caleb, who stood tall despite his exhaustion. The second test had been passed, but there was still much more to come. The castle air grew heavy with a strange kind of silence after Caleb passed the second test. The lake's waters had receded, and with them, the ominous tension that had followed the brothers. Ethan, still recovering from his own failed attempt, stood silently, his eyes now fixed on Caleb with a kind of quiet admiration that had not been present before. But Caleb knew that the trials weren't over. His brother's respect was earned not through easy victories, but through effort, and there would be more tests ahead. The woman, who had watched silently from the shadows, spoke at last. "The third test awaits you," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that made the air around them feel even heavier. "It is a test of truth, one that cannot be passed by force or courage alone. You must look beyond what is obvious and trust in what your heart tells you." She stepped aside, revealing a large wooden door that seemed to appear out of nowhere, etched with intricate designs that seemed to shimmer with faint golden light. Without a word, she gestured for Caleb to approach. As Caleb moved toward the door, Ethan, though quiet, couldn't help but speak, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "What do you think this test will be about? What does she mean by truth?" Caleb didn't respond immediately. The answer was something he had been thinking about as the trials progressed. Truth wasn't always what it seemed, and sometimes, the hardest truths were those hidden beneath layers of deception. The door opened smoothly as Caleb pushed it gently, the hinges creaking in protest. What lay beyond wasn't a hall or another room, but a vast, opulent chamber that took his breath away. The air was thick with the scent of honey and sweet flowers. Golden light filtered through tall windows, and the stone floor beneath them was covered in thick rugs woven with patterns of swirling vines and flowers. But it was the centerpiece of the room that caught Caleb's attention, an enormous golden hive, perched in the center of the room, surrounded by a group of 3 maidens. Each of the maidens lay in a deep slumber, their faces peaceful, but their features unmistakable. They wore the same flowing gowns, woven with silken threads that glowed in the light. But there was something different about them. Caleb could feel the strange energy that emanated from them, pulling at his very being, as if they were calling to him in a way he couldn't understand. The woman's voice broke through his thoughts. "These are the maidens of the Enchanted Court. Only one of them is the princess who sleeps under the curse, waiting to be awakened. The others are her companions, cursed along with her. But there is a truth you must discover. One of these maidens ate honey before the enchantment was cast. The other 2 consumed sugar, and that is what separates them." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. This was the final trial. He had to choose the true princess, the one who would break the curse, but how could he possibly know which one it was? The choice is not an easy one, the woman continued, her voice gentle. You must decide based on your heart, not what you see with your eyes. Trust the honeyed truth that resides in you, for only then will you awaken her. The riddle lay before him. Which of the three maidens had eaten honey? The answer seemed simple, but Caleb knew better than to trust simple answers in this enchanted place. He took a slow, deep breath, focusing on the air around him, the honeyed scent that lingered in the room. It was as though the very essence of the honey was calling to him. Could he truly trust this feeling? Or was it another test, one that played on his instincts? As he stood there, Ethan's voice came from behind him. Just pick one, Caleb. How long are you going to stand there staring at them? But Caleb wasn't so sure. He couldn't rush this final decision. The woman's words echoed in his mind. Trust in what his heart tells him. Caleb knelt by the first maiden, a young woman with golden hair that shone in the light. Her face, though peaceful, looked too perfect, as if it had been sculpted from marble. There was no warmth to her, nothing that pulled him toward her in any way. No matter how beautiful she appeared, Caleb knew this wasn't the one. He could feel a distance between them, something not quite right. Gently, he moved on. The second maiden was different. She had dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders in waves, her face serene, but with an air of mystery. Caleb couldn't explain it, but there was something about her that felt familiar. It wasn't just her beauty, it was something in the way her presence seemed to invite him in. He felt a pull, a tug in his heart, like the faintest whisper in the back of his mind. But the scent of honey was faint near her, no, not enough to convince him. Caleb stood up and turned toward the third maiden. The third maiden was the least striking at first glance. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, a deep auburn that shimmered in the light. Her face, too, was simple, yet there was something about her expression, something so gentle in the way she rested that Caleb felt his heart soften. The honeyed scent seemed stronger here, almost as though it had settled in the very air around her. A quiet warmth filled his chest, a sensation that hadn't been present with the others. He knew, without a doubt, that she was the one. The honeyed truth wasn't just in the fragrance of the room, it was in the warmth that spread through his own heart when he stood beside her. Caleb's heart beat faster as he leaned over, gently brushing a lock of hair from her face. He knew that this was the princess. Without a word, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the cheek, hoping that his intuition was right, that the magic he felt in this moment would be enough to break the enchantment. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. But then, the room seemed to tremble, and the air shifted as if the very fabric of the enchantment were unraveling. Slowly, the maiden's eyelids fluttered open, her eyes a soft shade of blue, as though the clouds themselves had parted to reveal a sky full of stars. The golden glow of the room brightened, and the magic that had held the castle in a timeless slumber was finally broken. The woman who had guided Caleb through the trials stepped forward, her face softened with approval. "You have done it. The curse is broken. The princess awakens." Caleb stepped back, his heart pounding with both relief and awe. The princess, no longer a figure of myth and legend, was awake, and the enchantment that had held her captive for so long was no more. She smiled at Caleb, her expression filled with gratitude and warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft yet clear. "You have freed me." Ethan, who had been watching quietly from the side, finally stepped forward. The transformation in his eyes was evident. There was no trace of the brash arrogance that had defined him at the start of their journey. Instead, he looked at Caleb with a respect that transcended words. "Well done," Ethan said simply. "You did it. You saved her." Caleb, feeling the weight of the trials finally lifting from his shoulders, allowed himself a small, weary smile. The journey was far from over, but the third test had been passed. Now, the princess had been awakened, and with her, a new chapter of their quest would begin. The princess, now fully awakened, sat up slowly, her delicate features glowing with the warmth of the sun's first light that streamed through the castle's high windows. Caleb stood a few paces away, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. He had broken the curse, but now what? The air in the room was alive with magic, and as the enchantment lifted, a sense of clarity washed over Caleb. It was as if the very essence of the castle, once heavy with the weight of slumber, had come to life again. The princess blinked a few times, her eyes adjusting to the light around her. She looked at Caleb, then at Ethan, who was standing quietly at the back of the room, his eyes wide with awe. The princess's lips curled into a soft smile, filled with gratitude and something else, something far deeper. She seemed to recognize them, as if they weren't strangers, but something far more familiar. "You have done it," she said softly, her voice carrying an ethereal quality that resonated in Caleb's chest. "The curse is lifted. I don't know how to thank you." Caleb bowed his head modestly, unsure of how to respond to such a statement. After all, it wasn't just his doing. Ethan's support, even in his silence, had been essential. The trials had tested them both in ways they never expected, and it was through their combined efforts that they had made it this far. "You don't have to thank me," Caleb replied gently. "It was my choice. I just followed my heart." The princess stood, her movements graceful as she stepped away from the bed of flowers where she had slept for so long. She glanced around the room, as if noticing it for the first time, the ancient walls, the soft glow of magic that lingered in the corners, the vines that clung to the stone. It was as if the enchantment had wrapped the castle in a timeless moment, freezing everything in place. "It's all so still," the princess whispered, her voice full of wonder. "I had been asleep for so long, I scarcely remember the world outside." Ethan, who had been watching the exchange quietly, finally stepped forward. His expression was different now, far removed from the impulsive, arrogant brother who had first sought glory and riches. The journey, the trials, and Caleb's bravery had transformed him in ways words couldn't describe. "You were asleep for a very long time," Ethan said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "But now, you're awake, and this place, it's ours to rebuild, together." The princess turned toward him, her eyes softening. "Yes, together," she repeated, a smile spreading across her face. She looked back at Caleb, her gaze filled with something Caleb could only describe as a deep, quiet admiration. "Thank you, Caleb. I will never forget what you did for me. You've given me a chance to live again, and in doing so, you've restored hope to this kingdom." Caleb was taken aback. The weight of her words settled over him like a blanket. All this time, he had only been thinking of the trials and the tasks ahead, never fully understanding the importance of what they had set out to do. The enchantment had not only bound the princess, it had trapped an entire kingdom in a state of perpetual slumber. The people, the land, the creatures who had once thrived in this castle, all awaited the princess's awakening to restore their lives. "Your kingdom," Caleb began, his voice quieter now, filled with reverence. "How do we restore it?" The princess's smile softened into a knowing look. "It's not just about breaking the curse. It's about awakening the enchantment that lies within each of us. The spell may have held us, but now we must return to the old ways, to the magic that once flowed freely through the kingdom. You see, the land itself was enchanted to mirror the state of its people. The curse may have taken root in the hearts of the court, but it is through kindness, patience, and humility that we can rebuild what has been lost." Caleb nodded, beginning to understand. It wasn't enough to simply wake the princess. The enchantment had to be awakened within the hearts of those who would rule with her, and the people who had been affected by the magic. "You and Ethan will both play a part in this," the princess continued, her voice full of warmth. "But you must first understand the balance between strength and compassion. A ruler must not only command, but also listen. The enchantment that binds us all is one of connection, of knowing when to act and when to wait." Ethan, who had been standing quietly beside Caleb, stepped forward, his earlier pride now replaced with a quiet determination. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I've learned much from my mistakes. I'll be part of this rebuilding, not as a conqueror, but as a protector of what truly matters." The princess nodded, and for the first time, Caleb saw the connection between them. There was no doubt in her eyes now, no hesitation. She was ready to lead, and so were they. But the work was only just beginning. "You are both ready for the next part of this journey," the princess said, turning toward the door. "Now that the enchantment has awakened in my heart, we must return to the kingdom. The people need to know the truth. The spell did not just keep me asleep, it held them in a kind of stasis. It is time for them to awaken too, and to restore the magic of this land." The air around them hummed with energy, the magical glow in the room shifting into something more vibrant, more alive. As they left the chamber together, Caleb could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. It was no longer about breaking a curse, it was about helping a kingdom find its way back to life. The enchantment, Caleb realized, had always been about more than just magic. It was about understanding the connection between people, their land, and their hearts. The trials had been testing him for this very moment, not just to awaken the princess, but to awaken the kingdom itself. As Caleb, Ethan, and the princess stepped into the hall, they saw the first rays of the morning sun begin to shine through the windows, casting a warm golden light over the castle's stone walls. The kingdom was waking, just as the princess had, and with it, the magic of the past would be restored, if they were willing to do the work. Caleb turned to Ethan, meeting his eyes with newfound understanding. "We've come so far," Caleb whispered. "But this is only the beginning." Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. "And we will rebuild it. Together." The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Caleb felt a deep sense of purpose. The enchantment was no longer just something to be broken. It was something to be nurtured, to be understood, and to be shared. And with that, the kingdom began to awaken, not just in body, but in spirit. The work ahead would be hard, but Caleb knew one thing for sure: they were ready. The grand hall of the castle echoed with the footsteps of the awakened court, now slowly returning to its original splendor. Caleb and Ethan stood side by side, watching the bustling preparations for the celebration that would mark the true end of the curse. Servants who had been in a deep sleep for years were now tending to the flowers in the courtyard, preparing feasts, and arranging chambers for the guests who would come from all corners of the kingdom. Despite the joy of seeing the castle come alive again, Caleb couldn't shake the weight of his thoughts. The enchantment had been broken, but it wasn't as simple as just restoring the kingdom to what it once was. There was more to rebuilding than just magic or grand ceremonies. There was a deeper understanding, one that Caleb had come to realize through the trials. As the princess and her court worked alongside the brothers, Caleb had begun to see the true depth of what was needed to heal the land and its people. The enchantment had bound them all, not just physically, but spiritually. And now that the curse was lifted, the people needed to learn how to live again, how to reconnect with each other, with the land, and with the magic that had once flowed through everything. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Caleb wandered the gardens of the castle, lost in thought. The flowers bloomed in vibrant hues, their petals kissed by the evening light, but Caleb could see the lingering shadows of the past, the castle's former state, its stillness, its emptiness. He could feel the weight of it in his chest, an understanding that the magic of the land had been more fragile than anyone realized. Ethan, noticing his brother's absence from the preparations, found him in the garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath a sprawling tree. The evening air was cool, and the soft rustling of leaves seemed to speak in whispers. Ethan sat down beside him, looking out at the vast grounds before speaking. You're thinking about the same thing, aren't you? Ethan asked quietly. Caleb looked at him, his gaze thoughtful. This place, it's beautiful. But it feels like it's not enough. The castle is waking up, but the land, the people, it's going to take more than just magic to make it whole again. Ethan nodded, his brow furrowed. We've broken the curse. We've given them back their lives. What more could we possibly do? Caleb shook his head slowly. It's not about giving them back their lives. It's about giving them something more, something they've lost. The people here, they've been asleep for so long that they don't remember what it means to live with humility, with kindness, with respect for the land. The magic is only part of the solution. Ethan frowned, his confusion evident. I don't understand. What do you mean? We broke the curse, didn't we? We did what needed to be done. Caleb turned to his brother, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. Yes, we did. But we did it because we were tested, not just in strength, but in patience, in humility. The trials, they weren't just about the tasks we faced. They were about learning to understand each other, to respect the magic that binds us all, to recognize the value of kindness and compassion over pride and arrogance. And now that the curse is gone, we have to help the people of this kingdom see that too. They need to understand that the magic of this land isn't just about power, it's about balance. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he thought about Caleb's words. It was true that Caleb had learned more from the trials than he had expected: patience, kindness, and humility. Ethan, too, had changed, though he had not yet fully grasped the depth of those lessons. You think the people of this kingdom need to learn humility? Ethan asked. Caleb nodded. Not just them. We do too. All of us. Ethan's lips pressed together as he considered his brother's words. Then, after a long silence, he spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. I'm willing to learn. But where do we start? Caleb smiled softly. We start by leading through example. We show the people what it means to serve, to care for the land, to understand the balance of things. We lead not with power, but with kindness. As they sat there, watching the evening light fade into the cool twilight, Caleb realized that this moment was a turning point, not just for the kingdom, but for their own lives. They had learned through the trials what true strength really was. It wasn't in fighting or in conquering, but in understanding the need for humility, for the quiet strength of knowing when to act and when to listen. The following days were filled with a new energy, an energy not driven by the promise of wealth or glory, but by the desire to restore balance to the kingdom. Caleb, Ethan, and the princess worked together to introduce new practices to the people, encouraging them to tend to the land with care, to treat each other with respect, and to approach life with a spirit of humility. The castle, once dormant and lifeless, began to thrive again. Flowers bloomed where there had once been only barren soil, and the people, who had once been blinded by the magic of the curse, now saw the world with fresh eyes, eyes that understood the importance of community, of caring for each other and the land that had sustained them. Caleb's heart swelled with hope as he watched the changes unfold. He realized now that the trials had not been an obstacle, they had been the key to unlocking the true magic of the kingdom. The magic wasn't in the princess's awakening, or in the breaking of the curse, it was in the transformation of hearts, the understanding of the deeper connections that held them all together. And in that moment, Caleb understood that humility was not just about recognizing one's own limitations, but about lifting others up, creating a community where every person, every creature, and every part of the land could live in harmony. As the days passed, and the kingdom began to flourish anew, Caleb knew one thing for certain: the real work had only just begun. But he was ready. And together, with Ethan and the princess, they would lead the way, not with pride, but with the strength of humility, the strength that would guide them to a brighter, more prosperous future. The lessons were learned, and the path forward was clear. With patience, compassion, and humility, they would rebuild, not just the kingdom, but their very souls. The first light of dawn broke through the tall towers of the castle, casting a golden hue over the vast grounds below. The land, which had once been frozen in time, now seemed to breathe again, vibrant with life. The air was rich with the scent of blooming flowers, the sound of birdsong, and the laughter of the people who had awoken to a new world. The kingdom, once bound by an ancient enchantment, had begun to recover from the slumber that had stolen its vitality. Caleb, Ethan, and the princess had worked tirelessly alongside the people to restore balance, rebuild their homes, and heal the land. The curse had been broken, but it was the brothers' vision and their lessons in humility that had truly set the kingdom on the path to restoration. The people no longer saw the world through the lens of power and privilege. They had come to understand that true prosperity lay not in riches, but in balance, balance between nature and humankind, between leadership and service, between wisdom and kindness. Caleb and Ethan walked together through the grand halls of the castle, their eyes sweeping over the bustling preparations for the grand feast to celebrate the kingdom's restoration. The castle had been carefully restored, each stone carefully placed, each room carefully furnished to honor the rich history of the kingdom while blending in the new energy of growth and renewal. It was a place of hope, where the old ways and the new could coexist in harmony. As they passed by courtiers, servants, and citizens who had gathered to contribute to the festivities, Caleb caught sight of the princess, standing on the balcony of the castle, gazing out at the kingdom she had once ruled in her sleep. Her beauty had been untouched by the enchantment, and now her spirit, too, was untouched by the fear that had once gripped her heart. She had become a symbol of the kingdom's rebirth, gracious, wise, and filled with the same quiet strength Caleb had found within himself. "You know," Caleb said, his voice low, as they walked side by side, "when we first set out, I thought the hardest part would be breaking the enchantment. But now, I realize the true challenge was always going to be restoring the kingdom and ourselves." Ethan, who had grown quieter and more introspective since their journey began, nodded thoughtfully. "I know. It wasn't just the land we needed to heal, but the hearts of the people. They needed to understand what we've learned, the importance of humility, kindness, and respect. It's not just about ruling, it's about leading by example, giving back what we take. Caleb smiled at his brother, feeling a warmth in his chest as he saw how much Ethan had grown since their first journey into the woods. The brash, ambitious young man had transformed into someone who understood the deeper responsibilities of leadership, someone who now saw the strength in service. As they continued their walk through the castle, they arrived at the grand hall, where the final touches were being made for the feast. A long table stretched across the room, laden with platters of food, bread, fruit, honey, and roasted meats, all prepared by the people of the kingdom, who had once struggled to find enough to eat. Now, they celebrated their prosperity, but it wasn't just the abundance of food that marked the occasion, it was the abundance of hope. The brothers paused as the princess approached them, her elegant gown flowing as she walked. Her eyes were bright, filled with gratitude and wisdom that belied her years. She had truly grown into her role, not as a figurehead of royalty, but as a ruler who cared deeply for the people she governed. "I've been thinking about what you said, Caleb," the princess said, her voice soft but strong. "About leading by example, about restoring the kingdom from the inside out. It's true, we can rebuild the walls and the halls, but the true restoration will only come when we rebuild the hearts of our people. It will take time, but I believe we can do it." Caleb nodded, his heart swelling with pride. The princess had become more than just a ruler. She had become a partner in this journey, a true leader who saw beyond her own position and understood the needs of those she governed. Ethan, too, seemed to share in the sentiment. "We've come a long way," he said, looking around at the bustling room. "And it's not just about what we've done, but what we've all done together. The people of this kingdom, they're the true strength. We've just helped show them the way." The princess smiled, her eyes glinting with a quiet confidence. "Together, we are the kingdom. And together, we will continue to grow." As the evening drew near and the hall filled with the sounds of laughter and music, Caleb felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. This was the moment he had dreamed of since they first set foot in the Enchanted Woods, the moment when the kingdom had truly been restored. Not through the lifting of a curse, but through the transformation of its people, its leaders, and the land itself. The feast began, and as the brothers sat at the table, surrounded by friends, family, and citizens of the kingdom, Caleb looked out at the faces around him. They were no longer the sleepy, disenchanted souls they had once been. They were alive with the energy of the present, full of hope for the future, and filled with the quiet strength that came from understanding the value of humility and unity. And in that moment, Caleb knew that the kingdom had truly been restored, not just in its outward beauty, but in its heart. The journey had been long, and the trials had been difficult, but in the end, it was the lessons of humility, kindness, and patience that had made all the difference. As the stars twinkled above the castle, Caleb leaned back in his chair, his heart full. They had all learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength lies not in power, but in the power of the heart, the power to love, to care, and to lead with humility. And as he looked around at his family, his brother, the princess, and the people they had fought so hard to help, Caleb knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. The kingdom had been restored, but there was still much more to come. Together, they would build a future filled with hope, a future that was brighter than any magic could ever make it. The kingdom was healed, the curse had lifted, and a new dawn had truly arrived. The grand hall of the castle was alive with warmth and joy. Tapestries, rich with vibrant colors, hung from the walls, their threads shimmering in the soft glow of lanterns. The long banquet table stretched from one end of the room to the other, laden with food and drink that filled the air with delicious aromas. The laughter of children, the chatter of the people, and the sweet melodies of a harp played by a local musician blended into a symphony of celebration. It was a night unlike any other in the kingdom, a night of reunions, of shared joy and reflection, and of healing for a land that had been asleep for so long. Tonight, the kingdom was not just a place of restored magic, but a place where its people came together, stronger and more united than ever before. Caleb sat at the head of the table, his heart swelling with emotion as he looked around at the faces gathered before him. His father, once a weary and sorrowful man, sat beside him, his eyes filled with pride as he watched his sons. Ethan, now transformed by their journey, sat next to Caleb, his usual brashness replaced by a quiet contentment. Together, they shared a bond forged in the trials of the Enchanted Quest, a bond that no curse or hardship could ever break. The princess, now the queen of the restored kingdom, sat at the far end of the table, her radiant smile reflecting the joy that had filled the hearts of everyone around her. Her wisdom, her kindness, and her strength had proven her not just a figurehead of royalty, but a true ruler of the people. She, too, had found her place in this new world, and as she looked around at the gathering, her heart swelled with gratitude for the journey they had all taken together. As the feast began, the air buzzed with stories of the past and dreams for the future. The people who had once feared that they would never see a life beyond the curse now shared their hopes for a future filled with prosperity, peace, and the promise of unity. They spoke of the changes they had seen in themselves, in their neighbors, and in their kingdom. No longer was there a division between the noble and the common, between the rich and the poor. In the eyes of every person in the hall, there was a shared understanding. They were all part of the same tapestry, woven together by their experiences and their newfound bond. The feast was not just a celebration of the kingdom's restoration, but also a celebration of the individuals who had made it possible, the brothers who had dared to take the journey, the princess who had trusted in their strength, and the people who had worked alongside them to rebuild the land. It was a night where even the smallest of contributions were recognized, where every face in the room mattered. As the evening wore on, Caleb stood to make a toast. He raised his glass high, the glimmering wine catching the light, and the room fell silent in anticipation. Tonight, Caleb began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, we celebrate more than the lifting of a curse. We celebrate the strength of this kingdom, our strength. Not in our riches, not in our power, but in our unity, our kindness, and our shared purpose. We have all been through much together, and tonight is a testament to what we can achieve when we work as one. He looked to his brother, Ethan, who smiled warmly back at him, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Caleb's gaze then shifted to the princess, now the queen, whose eyes were filled with pride and gratitude. To my brother, Caleb continued, his voice thick with affection, who has proven that even the bravest hearts can be humbled by kindness and patience. To the princess, who has led us not with power, but with wisdom and compassion. And to every one of you, who has stood beside us through it all, giving your hearts, your strength, and your love. The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinking in celebration, and for a brief moment, the noise and bustle of the feast seemed to fade into the background as Caleb felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The journey had been long, but the reward was more than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just the restoration of the kingdom, but the restoration of the people within it, of their hearts, their minds, and their souls. As the evening continued, stories flowed like wine. The older villagers told tales of the kingdom before the curse, of how it had once been a land of abundance and joy. The children listened wide-eyed, their faces alight with excitement as they imagined the world their parents had once known. The people spoke of what they had learned from the trials they had faced, how they now understood the value of hard work, of compassion, and of humility. They had learned to see beyond their differences, to recognize that every person, no matter their station, had something valuable to contribute. Later in the evening, as the music played softly in the background, Caleb and Ethan took a moment to step outside onto the balcony of the castle. The cool night air brushed against their skin, and the stars sparkled overhead like diamonds scattered across a velvet sky. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the night's events hanging silently between them. "It's hard to believe it's all over," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "The kingdom, our lives, they've changed so much in such a short time." Caleb nodded, his gaze drifting out over the restored lands below. The kingdom was flourishing, fields of wheat swayed gently in the breeze, the once dried river now flowed with crystal clear water, and the streets were alive with the laughter of children playing. "We've come a long way," Caleb said softly. "But I think this is just the beginning. We've rebuilt the kingdom, but now we have to rebuild its soul, its heart. And that will take time." Ethan smiled, a rare but genuine smile. "I'm ready for it. And whatever comes, we'll face it together." They stood there for a long moment, looking out over the kingdom they had fought so hard to restore. And as they did, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would always have each other, and the kingdom they had saved. The feast inside continued long into the night, but Caleb and Ethan remained outside for a while longer, sharing the quiet peace of a job well done. Tonight, the kingdom was whole again, and so were they. And so, in the warmth of reunions, in the strength of shared purpose, the kingdom celebrated its new dawn, a dawn that promised a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. The feast had ended, the hall now dimmed and quiet, save for the soft rustling of the evening breeze through the open windows. The night's revelry had left behind a gentle warmth, the kind that lingers long after the music fades and the last toast is made. In the quiet stillness of the castle, Caleb and Ethan found themselves once again on the balcony, looking out over the moonlit landscape. It was a rare moment of solitude, just the two of them, standing side by side after the celebrations. The once thick silence between them, formed from years of rivalry and unspoken words, had gradually unraveled. The journey they had undertaken, the challenges they had faced together, had reshaped not just the kingdom, but their relationship. Ethan turned to his younger brother, his face illuminated by the silver glow of the moon. There was a softness in his expression that hadn't been there before, a quiet recognition of the brother he had once overlooked. "You know," Ethan said, his voice low, "I always thought that strength was something you could see, something loud, something bold. It was about being the first to act, to fight, to win." He paused, as though searching for the right words. "But I think I've learned something different. Strength isn't just in what we do. It's in how we treat others, how we lift them up, how we stand together." Caleb looked at his brother, a small, understanding smile tugging at his lips. "I think you're right," he said softly. "True strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's in the quiet acts of courage, the times you choose to listen, to be patient, to be kind. It's in knowing when to fight, but also when to stand down." Ethan nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. It was clear that the trials they had faced together, the challenges they had overcome, had shaped him in ways that Caleb had always known were possible. Ethan's bravado, his rush for glory, had been tempered by the humility of the quest. And now, standing beside him, Caleb saw the depth of the man his brother was becoming, a man who was no longer defined by ambition, but by love and responsibility. "I never really understood you, Caleb," Ethan admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "I always thought you were too quiet, too cautious. But now, I see it wasn't fear holding you back. It was wisdom. You were always thinking ahead, always seeing what needed to be done, even when no one else could. I guess I didn't realize how much I had to learn from you." Caleb's heart swelled with affection for his brother. In the past, their bond had been strained, with competition and miscommunication often driving them apart. But now, after everything they had been through, he realized just how much their connection had changed. "You taught me something, too," Caleb said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You showed me what it means to take risks, to step forward even when things seem impossible. I might have hesitated at times, but you never did. You taught me that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when you're scared." Ethan smiled, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. It was a gesture of both affection and acknowledgement, one that spoke volumes more than any words could. The two brothers stood in companionable silence for a while, the quiet of the castle surrounding them. In that moment, they didn't need to say anything more. The years of distance, the misunderstandings, and the rivalry had all fallen away. What remained was something far deeper, a bond that could never be broken, forged in the fires of their shared journey. As they gazed out over the kingdom, Caleb's mind wandered to the future. The kingdom had been restored, yes, but that wasn't the end of their story. The trials they had faced had only been the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would continue to rebuild, not just the land, but the relationships and the lives that had been touched by their adventure. Do you think we'll ever return to the village? Caleb asked after a long pause, his voice breaking the silence. Ethan looked over at him, a gleam in his eye. Of course. But not as we were before. We've seen too much now. We know there's a bigger world out there, and it's waiting for us. Caleb smiled at the thought. I think I'm ready for that. And I'll be right there with you, Ethan said firmly. Whatever comes next, we face it together. It was a promise, a simple one, but one that carried the weight of everything they had gone through. Together, they had ventured into the unknown. Together, they had faced trials and challenges that had shaped them into who they were now. The bonds between them had been tested, stretched, and pulled to their limits. But through it all, they had emerged stronger, united in a way that neither of them had ever imagined possible. As the night deepened, the two brothers remained on the balcony, speaking softly of the future, of what lay ahead. Their journey was far from over. But for now, in the quiet of the castle, in the peace of a world restored, they were content to simply be together. And that, in itself, was enough. The days following the restoration of the kingdom were filled with celebrations, but for Caleb, they felt almost like a dream. He had never imagined that his quiet and humble life would lead him to such a profound place of power, and yet here he stood, at the heart of a castle, surrounded by wealth and beauty, a kingdom restored to its former glory. The princess, whose enchanted slumber had been broken by his gentle kiss, had awoken to a world transformed. Her name was Lysandra, and her beauty was unparalleled, but it was her kindness and wisdom that truly captured Caleb's heart. Though the kingdom was in the midst of rebuilding, and there were many responsibilities that required her attention, she made time to speak with him. Each conversation with her felt like a new chapter in a story that was just beginning, one that Caleb had never imagined for himself. It was one quiet afternoon, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the now thriving kingdom, that Lysandra turned to Caleb with a serious expression. "Caleb," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "There is something I must ask of you. A promise, if you will." Caleb, who had come to admire her in ways he couldn't fully explain, looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "What is it, princess?" Lysandra's gaze held his, her voice firm yet gentle. "I cannot rule this kingdom alone. There is much to restore, and there are many challenges ahead. I would ask that you remain by my side, not just as a hero, but as my equal. Together, we can rebuild, together we can lead. Will you help me guide this kingdom into its future? The words hung in the air between them, as delicate and yet as weighty as the promise they carried. Caleb's heart raced at the thought, the weight of her request settling upon him. He had never imagined himself as a ruler, nor had he sought a position of power. His journey had always been about finding his place in the world, and he had never thought that place would be at the side of a princess, leading a kingdom. I don't know if I'm the right person for such a responsibility, Caleb replied, his voice unsure. I've always been the one to follow, to support. I've never thought of myself as someone who could lead. Lysandra smiled softly, her gaze unwavering. That is why I ask. You see things that others cannot. You have wisdom, patience, and kindness. You led without arrogance, and you showed compassion when others might have given in to greed. Those are the qualities of a true leader, Caleb. I trust you. Her words sank deep into his heart, stirring something inside him, a feeling that had been growing since the moment he had helped restore the kingdom. The realization that he could make a difference, that his actions, his choices, could shape the future, was both humbling and empowering. Caleb took a deep breath, his gaze moving across the land that was now his home. The vast fields, the bustling village, the thriving markets, all these were the fruits of their trials. The lives of the people, their hopes, their futures, rested on the shoulders of those who would lead them. I will help you, Caleb said at last, his voice steady with newfound resolve. I will stand by your side, Lysandra. We will rebuild this kingdom, together. Lysandra's eyes sparkled with gratitude, and for a moment, the entire world seemed to pause around them. There was an unspoken understanding between them, an unbreakable bond that had been forged through the trials, the journey, and the battles they had faced together. I knew I could count on you, she whispered, her voice soft and full of trust. In that moment, Caleb realized that his promise was not just to Lysandra, but to the people of the kingdom as well. He was no longer just the quiet younger brother who had followed Ethan on an impossible quest. He was now a leader in his own right, standing at the precipice of a new future. The weight of the promise felt both heavy and light at the same time. It was a promise to guide, to protect, and to serve with kindness and wisdom. But it was also a promise to never forget who he was, a brother, a son, and a man who had walked through the deepest woods and faced the most difficult challenges to reach this moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Lysandra placed her hand gently over Caleb's. Together, we will create a kingdom where kindness and courage lead the way. A kingdom where everyone, no matter their station, has a chance to thrive. This is the promise I make to you, and to all who call this land home. Caleb's heart swelled with pride as he took her hand in his. And I promise to stand by you, to help guide this kingdom into a new age of peace and prosperity. And so, As the stars began to twinkle above them, Caleb and Lysandra stood side by side, their promise echoing through the vastness of the kingdom. Together, they would lead, together, they would create a future brighter than any they had ever imagined. The years that followed Caleb's promise to Lysandra were filled with growth, prosperity, and peace. The kingdom, once forgotten and lost in the shadows of time, now flourished under their united rule. The land, with its deep forests and sparkling lakes, seemed to shine brighter with each passing season. The fields grew lush with harvest, the markets bustled with trade, and the people, whether farmers, craftsmen, or scholars, found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in the new world they had built together. Caleb had come to understand what it meant to lead, not with arrogance, but with patience, humility, and love for the people who trusted him. And Lysandra, though born into royalty, had proven that true leadership came not from privilege, but from the heart. She was not a distant monarch, but a queen who knew the value of kindness, of listening, and of sharing in the lives of her people. Together, they had built not just a kingdom, but a community, a family of loyal citizens bound by the same vision, the same desire for peace and prosperity. The trials they had faced, the enchanted castle, the tests, and the dangers of the deep woods, had shaped them into a force stronger than any army could ever be. They ruled not with an iron fist, but with a gentle touch that healed old wounds and fostered growth. It was on a warm spring day, years after their first meeting in the restored castle, that Caleb and Lysandra stood together on the balcony once more. The same golden light of the setting sun bathed the land in its soft glow, and the castle's gardens were alive with color, flowers of every shade blossoming in the fertile soil. The air was filled with the scent of lavender and honey, the same sweet fragrance that had once marked the moment of the princess's awakening. "Do you remember," Lysandra said, her voice soft as she gazed out over the land, "how it all began? The journey, the trials, the promises we made?" Caleb smiled, a quiet joy in his heart. He had never imagined that his life would unfold in such a way, but now, standing beside Lysandra, it felt as though every moment had been leading to this. "I remember," he said, his voice steady and full of love. "I remember how uncertain I was, how unprepared I felt for everything that was ahead. But now, I see that it was all worth it." Their eyes met, and in that glance, there was an understanding that spoke louder than words. They had walked the path together, through every trial and every joy. And now, they stood at the pinnacle of a life they had built not for themselves, but for all who called this kingdom home. "We've done it," Lysandra said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "Together." "Yes," Caleb agreed, his heart full of contentment. "Together." As they stood side by side, their hands intertwined, they turned to face the bustling city below, the heart of their kingdom. The sounds of life filled the air, the laughter of children playing in the streets, the chatter of merchants selling their wares, the songs of bards telling tales of old. All of it was a testament to the work they had done, to the legacy they had created. And in the distance, beyond the walls of the castle, the deep woods still stood, the place where their journey had begun. It was no longer a place of mystery or danger, but a symbol of all that they had overcome. Caleb knew that it would always hold a special place in his heart, where his brother had fallen into slumber, where he had faced the trials that tested his character, where he had first met Lysandra. As the days passed, Caleb's bond with Lysandra deepened, and the people of the kingdom saw in them a love that was both strong and gentle. Their union became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love and compassion could light the way. And Ethan, though once driven by ambition and pride, had found his place in this new world as well. After his awakening, he had spent time reflecting on his journey, learning from the mistakes he had made, and ultimately finding happiness in a quiet corner of the kingdom. He had settled into a life of peace, marrying one of the ladies-in-waiting, and together they built a family. His heart had been transformed by the experience, and though he no longer sought glory, he had found contentment in the simpler things in life: family, friendship, and the knowledge that he had played a part in his brother's success. And so, the kingdom flourished under the guidance of Caleb and Lysandra, with the love they shared serving as the foundation for all that they built. The once forgotten land became a place of hope, where dreams were nurtured and where the people knew that their rulers would always be by their side, leading with wisdom and compassion. As for Caleb, he had found something he had never expected: his true purpose. Not in riches, nor in fame, but in the joy of leading a people with kindness, and sharing the weight of responsibility with Lysandra, and in knowing that the journey he had once feared had brought him to a place of peace. His heart, once uncertain, now beat with confidence, filled with the knowledge that he had walked the path of courage, and that his story was far from over. And so, the tale of Caleb, Lysandra, and their kingdom came to an end, but it was not an end at all. It was a beginning of a future where love, kindness, and unity reigned supreme. Happily ever after.